On today's episode, we're going to be talking about sandblasting and stripping your automotive body. What led us to this episode is all the different ways that you could go about stripping a car, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We did a talk with Chris Garcia a while back on his Caprice, and we made a few comments about how sandblasting has really ruined his car. But it was more of a general talk about his car and his journey, and we got a lot of very wild comments. People that are probably sandblasters day in, day out that swear up and down that you don't get warpage with sandblasting. Let's talk about when you're stripping the car in bare metal, you need to have one of two ways for adhesion. You either have a chemical adhesion where you're acid washing, or you have mechanical adhesion where you're actually sanding or giving the bare metal a tooth for the epoxy to stick to, as well as be clean. Well, the best way to do that is either acid washing or sandblasting or acid dipping. There's different reasons why we would dive into one of those scenarios, and obviously it would be the easiest for us to just drop it off at a sandblaster. Now, not all sandblasters are created equal. You have sandblasters with either very little experience, or maybe they only sandblast industrial items like buildings, frames, structural things that are thick. That doesn't matter. But what do you get when you have a fender that's only 40 to 60 thousandths of an inch thick? A lot of guys think that if they go to the dustless blasting, it's not going to warp the panel because everybody hears heat is what's causing the warpage. And they're not wrong, but on the same token, it's actually the sand particle that is shot peening the sheet metal and creating that warpage. That warpage is because you have panels on the car that are spot welded around a perimeter of a frame, and they all have bends. Well, if it has nowhere, think about pizza dough. If you are rolling out pizza dough, it has to expand and get larger. When you're shot peening something, meaning the sand particle is hitting the metal and it's expanding in that crater on a microscopic level. We have been searching for professionals to give us the guide, and so today we are at HD Powder Coating in Paris, California. He is, in my opinion, one of the best when it comes to sandblasting these bodies, and we want to be able to show something from a metal finisher's standpoint. So today we're here at HD Powder Coating. Thank you, Hans, for having us come in.
Indeed, my pleasure.
What do you guys do here?
We sandblast and powder coat.
Sandblast, powder coat. So,
and do some welding.
Welding too?
Yeah, we do a little
Don't you guys do epoxy too?
Epoxy primer.
Right.
But, yeah.
So like for guys like me, that's super beneficial.
No, yeah, we've coated entire cars with that. It's a good base.
Okay.
For guys like you to start with.
Okay. When we're going to dive into this fender, we're trying to show like what is the different variations of sandblasters, because you can go to any sandblaster and you'll get maybe a good result, maybe you get a bad result, but a lot of times people can't see what that damage is. And today we want to actually break down that process. So what we did was we brought you this fender that we've already metal finished. So this fender is a brand new fender from Auto Metal Direct. We were painting it for our paint and polish class that we held a few months back. And what I did was I took an Eastwood SCT and we stripped half of it for you. There was just a couple tiny little imperfections from the stamping of the fender. So we went through and we metal finished it. Now here's the biggest misconception, is that most people probably come into your shop and they ask you, well, how much are you going to warp my car?
Every time, yeah.
So what?
Half their car's missing most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah, we see
when they get real mad.
So what do you know, like, can you educate us on when you're sandblasting, what are some of the things that you think about to try not to warp a panel?
Well, number one would be the media. Number two would be the pressure. Number three would be distance. You really got to stay away from getting right up on it.
Okay.
Because it's thin. But I'm real interested to see what happens with this, because what do you have, 3 layers over here?
So this is just sealer, base, and clear. There is no filler, nothing.
I know you guys all swear that it does work, but I swear that it doesn't.
So that is the controversy right there, right? Like,
Especially this, when you bring glass like that, when you just have to rough it up. I mean, I think there's no chance of it warping, but it might be over there when there's Bondo. There's definitely gonna be warping, but
so obviously it's more of a concentrated area. If you have to concentrate in an area,
exactly.
you are introducing more. Well, what I want to give you guys from a metal finishing standpoint is we are trying to make mirrors in the sheet metal, and this isn't for everybody. This is just if you're trying
It's
to do
crazy to me.
yeah, trying to do a very high caliber restoration. Why does this matter? Because I think a lot of guys think that, well, even if it is warped, we're just going to slap it with filler from headlight to tail light anyway. What we have found is that if you do that and the panel is warped, okay, so if you have a piece of sheet metal that has bends on each end and it's locked in that area, when you're sandblasting it, maybe not you, we're going to find out today, but maybe you bring it to the other guy that's just shot peening it with big grains of sand. What that sand does, it hits the sheet metal and it shot peens it like a crater in the moon. And it puts it out like pizza dough. As you roll out pizza dough, it has to grow. That's what happens with these panels on a microscopic level. So how do you show that? Today, we actually brought an acrylic block from Next Level Blocks, and this won't work with a Durablock. Durablock is not hard enough. It has to be an acrylic block to be able to show it on that level. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 100 grit. We've already stripped this top section. So for this particular demonstration, we're going to give Hans just sheet metal bare, and we're looking for that mechanical adhesion. The goal here is we gave you no obstacles, and then we gave you obstacles with paint. We didn't even bring in any filler, and maybe we'll do that down the road, but I don't think we'll have to for this video.
I don't think we'll need it.
So so like you said, walnut, right? Maybe walnut. It might be a better option.
Yeah, maybe. But it's not going to take off, paint very well. It's still going to heat up if you're, blasting something like that. Walnut would be good on something bare like this.
Now, will walnut give you a tooth?
What we have is a Sandblast 60-80 grit, which seems to do. I mean, it's the best stuff we've ever came across.
Now, if I bring you a car that's painted, is that what you would typically prefer to go to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely the Sandblast 60-80 grit.
Now, what we're looking for here is a mechanical adhesion, so a tooth, a bunch of microscopic craters,
yep.
Which
that would be the best stuff.
In theory, is going to stretch the metal. To what degree, though? So all of those things is what I want to really educate you guys on, that you can't just go to any sandblaster and get that finish, because we have taken it to other sandblasters, and that's why we've gone down this path of what's better, acid dipping. And I can tell you now from experience that acid dipping is also not created equal. You get different levels, and that's a whole nother video that we're going to do in the future soon. But for this particular purpose, when you have different medias, what's kind of the spectrum, the general few that people would typically use to blast something that they don't know?
A lot of aluminum oxide. Most people use aluminum oxide.
Is that bigger?
And it's a lot bigger. There's coal slag. A lot of people use coal slag, but that seems to embed in the metal. I've tried it multiple times, and every time I use it, it messes up the machine, clogs it. And when you go to powder coat something, or even couldn't do something like this, because it embeds itself and creates little pinpricks everywhere. It embeds itself in the metal, basically.
Okay. And then like crushed glass is another one, right?
Crushed glass is pretty good. Something like this crushed glass might not be bad.
Okay.
You also have what's it called? It's basically round glass. They melt it and it comes out in beads.
Oh,
beaded glass.
Like just rip plastic meat, don't they have plastic meat?
Yeah, I got plastic. Yep. Never use that. Never use glass, because I've heard nightmares. Glass does the same thing. It embeds deep in the metal. You have to sand it again, hand by hand.
So really, the two things that you get warpage from is heat and the shot peening of the metal. So you have a pro and a con, and that's where we're on this path of what is the best option for getting adhesion and everything off without warpage. Well, if you're using a plastic media, I have used plastic media in a small cabinet when I was a machinist, and we would use that to clean off all the plastic injection molding. So all the residue left in the mold. And it wouldn't affect any of the molds, even if it was a polished finish. Now, here we are with a polished finish, and that's not what we want. If you're using a wire wheel to strip the car, it's polishing. If you're using an SCT, even though they call it a 40 grit, it's a strip disc, it is polishing. You have to come in and mechanically put either a D8 80 grit tooth or a fine sandblast. So walk me through, we're going to give you this fender right now. We're going to go in the booth with him. How are you going to hold the actual nozzle, and what media are we going to use to start with?
I'll start with the powder coat. Somebody brings in something that's powder coated, you know, if this was powder coated, you're definitely warping it because you have to be super close and it takes forever to get off. But something like this will be about 2 feet away. On this, you have to be a little bit closer to that. But I mean, it's all take your time and don't heat it up. So if you keep the tip moving, you should be fine.
Okay.
I would think.
Is there any?
Can't wait to see.
Is there any technique that we can do differently where you're? I know, like if you're painting,
Like scooping it off.
like you're blending it, maybe. I don't know. I mean, this is where this video is going to be awesome.
This will be just straight up, straight at it, back and forth. It'll be done in probably 30 seconds. But
okay,
I don't know what's under here. That's another.
So all I want to do for the first demonstration is just the bare metal.
That'll take 30 seconds, if that.
Okay,
And be
what we're looking,
2 to 3 feet away from it, and just gouge it, and then done.
what angle?
Straight at it.
Straight at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a little bit of an angle, but you know, basically straight at it.
Okay. And then pressure wise, do you change your pressures
I
depending?
try not to because it seems to mess up the machine quite often, but we're probably going to turn it down for this one.
Okay. Well, again, I want you to do the best thing that you can do.
No, yeah, we'll probably turn it down to about 75.
75.
Normally it's about 95. You know, when you're basically, I run everything at 95.
Okay.
It does the smoothest, best job. Takes off powder good. It'll do this very well. It'll do that good. It's a painted section.
Now, when we got here, you mentioned using older media that's more powdery.
Oh yeah. So
does that play a part?
Yeah. So we're gonna reuse. Basically, it gets down to dust, and we'll show you guys that. I reuse it over and over until it turns to dust, basically.
So your grit is going to get finer. Your sand particle is not going to be
yeah.
as big, and it's going to start breaking down. So obviously, if we're thinking about this as, call it a hammer dolly, hitting metal, the harder you hit that metal, the more it's going to stretch. The sand particle has to be thought about exactly the same as the hammer on dolly. So we're going to...
I never thought of it that way.
We're going to dicum and shoot this with the blue dicum layout fluid. We're going to take the block just so that way you guys can see how straight or not straight this panel actually is from just a bare metal auto metal direct panel. Again, don't think this is an original. All the purists are going to hate me and cuss me for ruining a fender. But the whole goal here is we come in and we try to do it the least amount of damage, and then we want to show how you get damage and do it the wrong way. We've put the dicum over real thin, and we're just going to focus on the top 6 inches or so of this fender. And we have the next level block with 100 grit. And really what we're trying to show you guys is that the pass of the scratch, maybe not so much down here from the stamping of the fender, but right through this area, it's consistently scratching evenly. And a lot of times when you're doing this job and you feel it with your hand, you won't see that warpage. You have to be able to use dicum to prove that it's actually doing this. And I also want to make the comment that if you have a sandblasted panel, I do not recommend shooting dicum over it and trying to remove it because you will not get it out of all the pores. Do not do this. This is just for demonstration purposes to show the level of warpage. We've taken the best area of this fender and just boxed it out with electrical tape because it's the best part of the fender. All we're looking to do is just clean it and get enough of a tooth that epoxy primer will stick to this fender. We've come through and we just lightly dusted this. We did have a small problem with the sandblaster pulsating slightly, so I just want to make sure we state that because you saw it took him 5 seconds to get that sheen off of it and a tooth. This is as clean as you would want it. You would not want to introduce wax and grease removers or anything of that sort to a sandblasted surface. We're going to spray the Dicam over this area and then block it with our 100 grit on the next level block to see what kind of warpage it introduced. Not enough of a change to matter.
But here's the crazy side. See what the tape is? Look at that. Now this, what's up? That was right. You can use tape to demonstrate that.
We have blocked out our small contact patch area. And are you shocked at what we found?
Yeah, I'm very shocked. Yeah, it's crazy. I thought that would be just the leftover glue from tape maybe, but this over here kind of proves it, how it's sunk down. Looks like it did lift or grow.
Exactly what you just said, grow.
Yeah,
that is what crazy. I want all of you guys that are sandblasting to understand is that when you're trying to do something on a high level, does this matter for most? Probably not. But what we can do with dissecting where this tape line is what should be blasted and what should not be blasted. So I am for sandblasting, but I am for picking the right guy who understands what that damage could cause. Now, this is specifically why I will hand strip, again, acid dipping being the best, because you're not putting anything abrasive. You're not heating it at all with a forceful media.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But, like, let's just give this fender as an example. If we flipped it upside down, you would have the structure, or let's call it a hood. Let's pretend that this tape is the inner structure of a hood. You are typically fine, I don't want to say, if you did it this way where it was already stripped and you just dusted the top of a hood, 9 times out of 10, no problem. It's when you flip the hood upside down and you have the inner structure. Anywhere that the inner structure is protected, you can blast that structure. So maybe in the future you could stuff cardboard inside the area to protect the outer skin, because what's happening here...
We've done that before.
Yeah. What's happening here is that you're hitting something uneven. And because, and this, like I said, took what, 5-10 seconds to be able to just rough that enough for epoxy. And if you do this on a hood and it's concentrated, now this was stripped bare metal, let's take into account that you have paint, body filler, or maybe even 3 coats of paint, how you have to stay in a concentrated area. We are going to continue doing some demonstrations with this because this was, number one, the best that we could provide. Now let's change a few of the things that we're going to do. We're going to come back in here and I want you to concentrate differently. So you guys were shooting roughly 30-degree angle or so,
Yep.
45. I'd like you guys to come in. We're gonna tape this back off again, and I'm gonna put a tape line through this center here to demonstrate like the underside of a hood. And I want you to blast it uneven. Don't do it even, and maybe you get a little bit closer. It's not going to take much. You saw this only takes 10 seconds to show. But just to give you an idea, and this is also with an old sand, or what's the media?
It's broke down a couple times.
But is it sand or is it?
No, it's Starblast. It's a coal slag, but it's clean. It's filtered like 4 times.
Okay. So it doesn't have a lot of big particles, and it's super dusty, so it's not as abrasive.
Right.
Biggest thing is the more abrasive media that you use, if you're cheaping out and you're putting whatever aggressive, maybe it's crushed up asphalt in your, that's basically what the coal slag looks like.
We started out with beach sand here.
Yeah.
I used to go down to the beach and get buckets.
Yeah, whatever works. Hey, we've
But
seen worse.
The guy that got me started in this actually did that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is here, we're trying to connect the professionals in the sandblasting and the professionals with doing metal finishing to fully understand the full spectrum if we're trying to get a restoration to here. Now, here's a point that I want to make. Why does this matter, or why would it matter on your restoration versus not? If you're a guy who's just going to go to local car shows, you don't care about a mirror finish, this is pretty irrelevant because you're going to bodywork it. Here's the big argument. Everybody says, well, I'm just going to cover the car in body filler from headlights to taillights. You look at our cars, they're covered in body filler, headlights to taillights. But the goal is the least amount of mill thickness. If we can metal finish something and not have warpage in there, then that keeps the mill thickness down. Less mills means less failure. Less different products means less failure. But the number one reason that this matters is if you are body working this, let's use this as an example. This one low that we have in the fender.
That's crazy.
If we take this car to say Indio for you guys that don't know, in California gets to 120 plus degrees. Now let's say we body worked this fender and it was 70 degrees here where we are now. This will look perfect. But if the temperature changes colder or hotter, this is going to expand. And because this sheet metal is bound by the shape and spot welds of a frame like a hood, it can only expand so far. So if you have a ripple in something and you heat it up, that ripple is going to grow. And that's why you'll hear the term in the bodywork industry with phantom waves. Phantom waves are not related to filler. They're not related to, I've had people tell me, it's because your filler got wet, you're not supposed to wet sand it. It's because it's porous. That's not it. It all starts at ground zero. It starts in your metalwork. If your metalwork is not perfect and it's not relaxed, your car is only good for the temperature that you body worked that car in. Any kind of deviance, it could be 10 degrees.
What's the ideal temperature then you want to do that?
It really is going to just
85,
depend.
90?
Everything that we do with paint products is always, TDS sheets always 70 degrees is what they test it at.
Wow.
But is your car going to be inside the show at SEMA at 70 degrees, or is your car going to be shown outside at Pebble Beach?
95 degrees.
Is it going to be in Indio where it's 120? So the reason that having relaxed sheet metal that's corrected and metal finished matters for that level of car. Again, most people are not looking at this. This is not something, you agree.
I would have never thought of that.
Well, even when we started, right? The fender was all polished up and it looked perfect to our eye and our hand. So all the guys that say, well, I do body work and you got to feel it. The level of car that we're talking to and referring is a car that cannot be felt. That finish cannot be felt. It can not be seen. But when you do these processes through DICOM and guide coating and all the way through cut and polish, the level of finish on the car is so high of a quality that every little thing matters. I think that's the biggest thing I want to drive home. So this is giving you a general idea, but now let's change some things. Let's pretend it's your first day on the job, and
let's ruin this fender.
Let's ruin this fender.
Oh yeah.
Let's show how drastic this can be, because right now this is very minimal. The other thing I want to mention is, what do you do? Because here's the number one question. I already blasted my car. Now what do I do? Well, I guess self-reflect and go, what is the goal for your car? Is it Pebble Beach or not? Understand that where it was blasted versus where it was not blasted, what happens? If it was perfect before, a lot of guys don't know if it was perfect before. That's the problem. So then you put Dicom on it, you block it, and you're like, I have lows everywhere. You'll even have them on the A-pillars in the small areas of the sheet metal. And what I want you to understand is that everywhere the sand particle hit, it is stretched. So in order to get that to reverse, you have to shrink it. That's where a hammer dolly shrinking disc comes into play. Hammer dolly is stretching also. So in order to reverse this, we would be using a shrink disc only in the areas that have stretched.
What's a shrink disc?
Shrink disc is a stainless steel disc, and you are using friction for your heat. Well, when your heat's shrinking, most people hear about a torch where you heat it and then you quench it with water. This we're doing it so fine that we're just rubbing the panel. That technique alone is an art in itself. So understanding how metal moves and understanding how to reverse these becomes an issue, because let's just use a hood as an example. You have areas that are cut out in the bottom of a hood. Now you've stretched it unevenly, and I guarantee you, even if you dust it like that, you can dust it, block the top side of the hood, and it will give you an exact representation of what the inner structure looks like on the inside.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, now how do you get a shrink disc into those areas? You have to take all the spot welds out and remove the inner structure of the hood. It is excessive to be able to reverse that stretch. So that is why it matters. Again, if it's not a high-end show car, this probably doesn't matter. But let's go through the process now and show how one sandblaster like yourself could introduce very little warpage versus somebody who could really ruin a car. Because I see it all over social media. A lot of the guys that I follow, some of which I used to use, and they just sit there concentrated, close. You're paying a guy $10 an hour. Again, it matters on who you have. Is he trained? Does he understand what it does? Do you as the owner understand what it does?
I'm learning a lot today.
So that's really what we're trying to be about. Now that we broke this down for you, in theory, anywhere that you are not consistent or your media is bigger, we already know just off of the first demonstration that we are stretching the sheet metal. So for this demonstration, I am giving you a representation of what the bottom side of a hood may look like with a structure. And we're going to go through and we are going to bring the blaster in close to the center of one, and then we are going to do a zigzag pattern closer. So how close, the pressure, everything. You can dial in your sandblast equipment to perform this, but you would have to do this every time with Dicom and a block to be able to know what works or what doesn't work. So we're going to roll into the next demo.
This is how you don't sandblast.
Yeah. Keep in mind, this is just for demonstration. This is definitely not how Hans does this normally. Usually he is just dusting through it. The other thing while we're waiting for this to dry is that maybe you guys can dissect your car into what sections you only want to sandblast. For example, if I have a customer that has, a budget, not an endless budget, but let's say they want to stay within a realm, we'll put them on the rotisserie, we'll bring them to Hans, and he'll do the belly, the inside, the firewall, all of those things that have bends in them and structure have a lot more strength. The biggest thing you're going to have issues with is low crown panels. If it's a real curvy car, you're not going to see the same issue either. It all depends on how much strength does that panel have. The lower the crown, the more damage you are going to see with blasting.
Craziest part to me is that tape. You can feel it with your hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And Hans and I were talking earlier is we did a 70 Camaro a while back, and we were trying to save the budget on how many times we take the car apart, put it back together. So Mike and I, we bodyworked the car. We had everything wet sanded to 600. Now keep in mind, we were using acrylic blocks just like we do today. The finish on the car was very, very high level of straight. And then at the very end, when we just went back through to recheck it, so we took the car apart, put it on rotisserie, we took it to a different blaster. This was before we knew Hans, and we had him blast it. Well, the inner structure was a couple inches apart from the very top roof. Again, low crown, and there was a bunch of 3/8 holes. I knew that the representation would be there because when we guide coated on the final wet sand, when we put the car back together for paint, we were going over the body, and it was a direct reflection on the guide coat of the primer where everywhere was exactly those 3/8 holes from the inner structure. So that's what we're showing here is we're showing you the inner structure. So if we were to flip this fender over, call this a hood, this area would be high and all of this area would be low because it is ballooned up and it is stretched. Where it is not stretched, it is a low little valley. Here, where he went through zigzag, and you can see exactly wherever it is blue and it is low, that's where he concentrated more of the sandblast. So you can see exactly his path. So if you were joking around spelling your name while you were sandblasting, it is in the car and it will probably show up at the very end of your paint job. And then here we stayed concentrated and we just moved in close into a couple spots. And again, you can see where the more heat, and when we talk about heat and shot peening, so it's two things that are stretching it. It is the heat and it is the shot peening, so the material that we're using. This is a really good material because it's been run through a few times. It's old media, so it's broke down. It's more powdery, not as much stretch. So just as an experiment, we brought the infrared gun out and we were checking it. When we started, it was a 77-degree panel temperature. And as he started going through it, it started heating up into the 80s, which it's only a few degrees difference. Not a huge deal, you wouldn't think. But the more he concentrated, that temperature kept going up. When he came through here nice and slow and close, I think the panel temperature, it was hard for me to see, I think it was around 130, 140 degrees. And then just for the heck of it, we went down below the blinker there, and we just concentrated in one spot to see how hot we could get that panel. And it got to 230 degrees panel temp. So for sure, it's the same as taking a torch and heat shrinking that panel. You don't have to use water. A lot of people think that when you heat shrink, you use a torch and you quench it with water. Everybody thinks it's the water that actually shrinks it, and it's not. It's the heat that shrinks it. The water just stopped it. So those molecules in the metal, when they expand, when they get hot, they expand and they relax. And picture like a house with different rooms, and the center being the living room. Everybody's spread evenly in the living room, okay? When you heat that living room up, everybody disperses into different rooms. When you let that cool slowly, everybody can move back into the living room. When you squinch it with water, you just stopped it. Everywhere those molecules have moved, and if the metal is inconsistent, they're all over the place, you just stopped the shrink. So that's why torch shrinking and heat shrinking and friction discs all play a different role.
Perfect timing, basically.
It's
when you hit the rag on the,
yes,
on the metal.
And a lot of times when we do it, we'll even, like Ken Sakamoto, I always talk about him. He's who taught me metal finishing. He'll take the rag and he'll just sweep it through so it's an even cool. You're trying to only heat and shrink the areas that you need to be able to reverse these issues. So we'll get into later videos with that, but this is just a demonstration to show you guys what we have, what the cause and effect was, and pivot, whether you're a blaster or whether you're a guy on the restoration trying to better what your work is. It's only as good as your metal. That's where you start. You don't build a house on sand. You need a good concrete foundation, and there is the proof. So do you have anything you want to add to this?
Not really. I didn't know it would creep up to 230 in this section here, though.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. And that just gets me every time.
And, I mean, with this being bare metal, we're not introducing hardly any texture like we've been doing because it's bare metal. If we actually blasted the fender where the paint is, it would be more. You wouldn't feel it, you wouldn't see it, and if you're going to a blaster that's going to go over everything with 80 grit, it's going to look all nice and pretty. But if you actually take a hard block and some 100 grit or 80 grit and go over it, you will see all of the warpage that is there. The thing to know is that whatever grit you're using to block it, it's like a magnifying glass. So the higher the grit, say you're at 320 grit, you're going to see way more warpage than if you use, say, 80 grit. So every time you step up in grit, it's closer, it's magnified. As you go up to 100 grit, 80 grit, it's like looking at it from a higher scale. And really, we're just looking for a nice relaxed panel. So moving forward, if I am going to have a panel blasted, I'm going to bring it to Hans, stripped on the exterior, and I'm going to make sure that he knows what that could cost if he hits it. Because it only takes a second for the blaster to hit it. So maybe we take cardboard and shove it in between the back sides of fenders just so we get structures. And the other thing that we've been doing is taking orange construction marking paint like they do in the streets. And we'll actually, you're going to blast the car, it's got however many coats on it. We will go through with the rotisserie and we will paint everything orange with that rattle can that I want you to only hit. Everything around that I won't coat. So say it's this fender, we would just strip the exterior with an SCT and maybe have him put a little tooth with just a quick dust. And then on the inner structure, we'll shove cardboard and we'll have it painted orange where he knows a clear direction on exactly what to blast. As soon as you veer outside of those areas and you don't have somebody that understands and has the parameters, you end up with warped panels. Yeah. Thanks again for having us, Hans.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for coming.
I hope this helped clarify some of the things that people get
Big
questions.
time. I learned a lot today, I'll tell you that.
And also, if you guys want a quality sandblaster, check the description. We'll have all of Hans's information. We're in Southern California, in Paris, California. HD Powder Coat. Thanks again.
Oh, man.